An election like today's isn't just a contest to see which candidates win a few years in office. It's also a moment to take the vital signs of our democracy, which voters come out to be part of the exercise, and whether they feel the system works. In recent elections, the pulse of young voters has been harder to detect than others. In 2012, only about 38% of eligible voters aged 18 to 29 went to the polls, compared with 70% of people over age 65. After a year in which many young voters felt the burn, and many more felt burned by the primary process in both parties, how does today's vote look to young voters, and what will tonight's results say about our civic health? Here to help us answer those questions are DeNora Getachew, the New York City Executive Director of Generation Citizen NYC. Welcome to the show. Carlos Jesus Calzadilla, a freshman at LIU and a former Bernie Sanders supporter, voting for Green Party candidate Jill Stein. Great to meet you, Carlos. And Brit Byrd, who works in New York City government and is a former Sanders supporter voting for Hillary Clinton. Thanks for being here, Brit. So DeNora, let's start with you. How are young voters different from other voters in how they vote, in why they vote? Do they look different at all?
Thank you for having me on today. You know, as you noted, this is an important opportunity for us in this moment to really think about the voice of young people. I run a nonprofit called Generation Citizen, and I run our New York City site, where we are working every day to ensure that New York City young people receive an effective action civics education. And the reason we do that is because we know that civics is missing in the classrooms, especially for underserved communities, where young people are, if you are in an underserved community, are 30% less likely to have interacted with government or realize what government matters to you. And what we see in this critical election is that millennials are coming of age, right? They are now outnumbering boomers in our population. And so it's their opportunity to have their moment and make their voices heard in democracy. And so what we do every day is empower young people in the classroom by giving them the skills, the knowledge, and most importantly, the motivation to plug into government and be civically active. What we know is that millennials are really focused on issues. So it's not just about people or candidates in particular, but who's going to address the issues that matter most to them. And so in our classrooms, we are teaching young people how to build consensus around local issues that matter to them in their communities, and then giving them the tools to be able to solve those problems over the course of the semester and actually take action on them. So it's not just kind of schoolhouse rock, if you will. What we do is give them the kind of driver's ed for civics, making sure they understand why their voice matters and what they should do with it. How do they actually engage with government to affect outcomes? We
actually have some statistics on civics and civic awareness among young people we're going to show on the screen. But I wanted to ask you, when did this sort of diminution of civics education begin? And to what do you attribute it? Is it being crowded out by other stuff, by math and science, taking over the school day, or is there some secret plot to undermine our democracy? What explains it?
I don't really want to say there's a secret plot, right, to undermine our democracy, but what I do think is happening is there's been a shift towards some of the other more important or viewed as more important components of the education system. And what we at Generation Citizen advocate for is a well-rounded education that includes civics. And so we are not the end-all, be-all solution for that, but really we're trying to build demand for civics to be back in the classroom, for students to be empowered and acting on issues locally, because that's what's going to make the difference, right? If you don't know why your voice matters and that you can actually affect change, you're less likely to view the political process as a way of doing that.
So let's bring in some of our younger voters here. Carlos, I'm assuming this is going to be your first presidential vote. You were a Sanders supporter. Jill Stein is apparently going to be your choice today, or has been your choice. Tell us about your decision-making process.
Yeah, so the decision is actually, based on, what I've seen during this election cycle. I have talked personally to thousands of voters as I volunteered the Bernie Sanders campaign. I was a field organizer for Tim Cano for Congress as he won up against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Now, Jill Stein, I feel very disenfranchised. I think during the primary process, we could see how our voices were silenced. I think the millennials and supporters of Bernie Sanders were really not wanted at all during the primary process. I was there in Orlando when they drafted the platform. I was in the convention as well, and I saw not only just the media blackout to the anger and frustration of the Bernie Sanders supporters, but also the treatment from the Democratic Party to half of its party. And one of the things to note is on WikiLeaks how we've seen how Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC colluded together to undermine Bernie Sanders' campaign. And that right there, for me, is completely outrageous, that we're supposed to live in a democratic society where everyone's voice is heard. And that is just unacceptable, because if we don't have democracy, we really don't have anything in this government.
Let me ask your vote today, just to kind of cast it in crude terms, people might say it's a protest vote. Are you trying to send a signal with that vote, or do you think Jill Stein is the best person to be president?
Yeah, so actually I think protest vote is when you vote against someone, and right now when you vote for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, most people are actually voting against, for the lesser of two evils, against what they dislike more. Actually voting for Jill Stein is not a protest vote, but a vote for something that I want to see in this country. I want to vote to see someone like that in the White House. Maybe this election won't be obviously looking at the polls. When you actually look at Huffington Post, New York Times, Hillary Clinton is bound to win the electoral vote by 90% probability. But a 5% of the popular vote for Jill Stein means that the Green Party will qualify for federal funding next election. That's $10 million in federal funding, and we can actually build a party that is not controlled by corporate influences such as the Democratic and Republican Party.
So, Brit, we've heard that you're probably going to go, or you have gone this morning, in a different direction. You were a Bernie supporter, a Senator Sanders supporter, sorry, and decided to support Secretary Clinton. Talk about your decision-making process. Did you consider voting for Stein, and how did you decide to go the way you went?
That's right, Jared. I did vote for Hillary Clinton this morning. There are really two reasons, I think. The first is that I subscribe to the idea that Donald Trump is uniquely incompetent, uniquely dangerous as a candidate to the President of the United States, and I believe that defeating him by the largest margin possible is meaningful and worthwhile to do. So that's one reason I voted for Hillary. The second is that I think, although the federal funding threshold does exist, I think that voting for a third-party candidate in the final general election is actually not exactly what's going to make third parties more viable in the long run. The way that our voting system is set up, period, makes incredible systemic barriers to third-party voters. I think something like proportional voting, something that the organization Fair Vote promotes and is actually on the ballot up in Maine today, would be much more meaningful to actually make Green parties or Libertarian parties, independent parties much more viable in the long run. As the system exists currently right now, a vote for the Green Party, unfortunately and unfairly to the candidates and people who support it, is not much more than a spoiler vote. So I would hope that Bernie supporters, such as myself in the primary, and Jill Stein supporters, and maybe even people on the Libertarian side, could join together after the election and maybe take a look at the systemic reasons why third parties are made almost impossible by a system as it is today.
I should mention we made an effort to get a Republican youngster on, someone who might be debating between Trump and Johnson. We're unsuccessful. But DeNora, when we talk about youth and disengagement, we do often tend to focus on, I guess, the political left, at least the media does. Are young conservatives as turned off by the process as we hear young progressives speaking about it?
Yes, and I'm speaking in my capacity as someone who runs a nonpartisan organization, so we definitely don't focus on educating or providing civics education to one set of constituents and not the other. For us, this is about educating all Americans and all young people to understand why they shouldn't turn their back or why they shouldn't disengage from the political process. But instead, we need them to make sure that they understand that politics can be positive, that we're thinking about what happens tomorrow, right? We're going to be launching a campaign later this week called Beyond the Ballot. It's not just about focusing our energy on today, November 8th, but really about what do we do to take actions as Americans to make our government more responsive and to our needs as a people as a whole. And so that's one step young people can take is hosting a debate with someone. I think this election has stirred up a lot of energy that we've learned how to disagree and be disagreeable, but that's not who we are at our core as Americans, I believe. And so we want to make sure that we understand that we can talk to each other and we can disagree about issues, but still be on the same side of moving democracy forward in America. And so I hope that folks will check out Beyond the Ballot to learn more about some of the actions people can take beyond today.
Definitely. Carlos, speaking of action, we have some footage of you actually leading a protest at LIU earlier this fall. And that indicates that you are a uniquely engaged person. How do you encourage people who are less sort of naturally political to be involved in the process? Someone who is, debating not between Stein or Johnson or Clinton, but whether to vote or all. How do you convince them to stay in?
Yeah, so my message to them is that we are living in a crucial time. Right now, our generation is facing crisis. We're facing a climate crisis. We are also facing, record amounts of income inequality, endless debt, $1.3 trillion in student debt. We're also facing an unstable political system, endless wars, low-paying jobs, and it is not just a luxury anymore. It's actually a necessity for my generation to stand up and speak out for what is right, speak truth to power, and not just vote, but actually put your body in the line. Right now, what we're seeing in North Dakota with the Dakota Access Pipeline, it is actually a shame in this country that we're seeing how, on behest of corporations, we're having police in riot gear shooting peaceful protesters with rubber bullets, with mace, and arresting them, also arresting journalists. And I think we're at a moment where we have to step back and be like, we have to do something. We have to fight for what is right. What happened in my school was completely unacceptable. That for the first time in American history, we're locked out over 400 professors. And what's the common denominator here? It's corporate greed. Corporate greed has taken over so many aspects of our lives when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, when it comes to our water, our environment. So that was a desperate need for people to engage because change never comes from the top down. It's always from the bottom up. It has to be demanded.
Brit, among your friends your age, roughly your age, this election has been extraordinary. And one could see it having one of two different effects. One, it could elevate the importance of voting to people because the stakes seem so high, or it could totally turn them off. Among people roughly your age you speak to, what has been the impact of 2016?
Sure. From my view, it's made people incredibly active. People are way more attuned, I think, to politics than they were in 2008, even if they were active in 2008. In 2008, I had not entered university. Now I'm a graduate, but in 2016, far more of my friends are talking about, say, systemic racism than they were in 2008. In 2008, we were kind of indulging a little bit of the idea that our democracy was just slowly being perfected or tweaked at the end, and that things had been solved. 2016, for better or for worse, it's become very apparent that there's still huge issues at the base of American politics. And in my perspective, people my age, around 24, young 20s, are more motivated than they were 8 years ago, because this threat, I think, has become, particularly real.
So, DeNora, when you look at the turnout figures, I mean, we lambasted how bad it was in 2012, only 38%, but that was a relatively good year in 2008 as well, compared to most of the years since 1971, when the voting age was lowered to 18. That suggests that the personality of the candidates has something to do with it. The Obama effect is something that's talked about a lot. Do you think that the changes we need to make to the system going forward, are they primarily cultural, thinking about voting as a duty, or is it mechanical, weekend voting, online voting, early voting? What do you think is the silver bullet, if there is one?
I don't know that there's a silver bullet, but there definitely are many steps that can be taken. And for much of my life, I've been a voting rights lawyer, really focused on the structural barriers that exist to participation. And New York does very poorly in that regard, right? I showed up at my poll site this morning with my young children in tow, ready to vote, stood in line for 45 minutes and had to leave in order to take them to school. And so, of course, my 5- and 4-year-old were like, well, we're going to come back later to vote. Of course we will. But that shouldn't always be the case. We shouldn't confine Election Day to one, at least in New York City, 15-hour day. Because what if I couldn't go back later? What if my child got sick on the way home and I couldn't go to the poll site, right? I think many states, at least upwards of 35, allow for early voting. And we've seen it. We've seen on the news people standing in line be able to cast their vote in advance so that they don't have to make a plan on Election Day that if, God forbid, one factor goes awry, upsets their ability to cast a ballot. We see things like online voter registration or automatic voter registration that actually would change the paradigm as it relates to being able to register to vote. Now the onus is on the individual to take the affirmative step to register. But I would bet that these millennials sitting here would say to me, the government has access to my information already. Why are they not using it for that purpose? If my name is in a registered government database and that information is secure and accurate, why am I not automatically put on the rolls unless I decide I don't want to be on the rolls? I used to work for an organization called the Brennan Center for Justice, and that's what they're advocating for nationwide, along with other good government and traditional civil rights groups, is really just getting rid of those barriers. It shouldn't be about whether I actually am on the rolls and can I show up on Election Day, did I change my address in time to be able to vote at this poll site or the other. It should be presumed that I am here to participate in democracy, and then let's have a debate on the merits of the issues.
So this is not an abstract issue. This is happening now. Democracy is occurring in real time across our country. Tonight we'll find out the results. When you look at the results tonight, with the idea not just of a particular candidate winning, but how the system overall is faring, what are you hoping to see? What will you be looking for?
Well, control of the Senate and the House is absolutely crucial. And I think it's also evidence of what's the biggest problem in our federal elections, which is that due to the composition vote and due to gerrymandering, it's made it almost certain that every single year that the national vote overall in Congress is not going to really reflect the distribution of seats. I think that there are a lot of mechanical barriers that can be removed to try to remove this. And fix this. In New York State in particular, I had to vote in 3 different primaries this year over the summer, very sparsely attended, and I know that next year when we have citywide elections, it'll be even worse. So I want to bring it back home to New York and Brooklyn, say that our state house and our city government can do a lot better to make voting less opaque and less confusing. And I would love to see something like they have in California, where the top 2 candidates in the primary move on. I think that would be great.
That is an interesting idea. Carlos, what are you looking for tonight, really quickly?
So for tonight, I'm looking for people to really realize that the 2-party system has really failed us, that people need to step out of line and vote for who they want, for their conscience. I'm looking for a lot of third-party votes. Hopefully, Jill Stein and the Green Party, we can get 5% of the vote. And also, on the more conservative side for Gary Johnson. And the barriers are gerrymandering. Election day should be a holiday so everyone can vote. Campaign finance. There's a lot. This structure. It's more as if people just vote, but at the end of the day, and I've talked to a lot of people, and it's true, they feel like their vote doesn't really matter because Congress, 94% of Congress gets reelected.
DeNora, as my fellow non-millennial on the panel, really quickly.
You outed me to everybody. I thought I was
What are you looking for this evening?
I am looking for, in addition to what my colleagues here have said, really just seeing that there's a turnout from millennials, right? Like I said, I want them to harness their power and know that their voice matters, because I think that's going to continue to fuel the work that Generation Citizen does in classrooms around the city and around the country every day. We want millennials to know they have a voice and that they should have the skills, the knowledge, and most importantly, the motivation to make their voices heard in the political process on Election Day and every day going forward.
Excellent points, everyone. Thank you very much. Breathe deeply. It will all be over very soon. Thank you for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you.